For 3 minutes, things looked like they were going to be much different in this rematch between the Seahawks and the Cardinals, but then Seattle decided to take the bull by the horns and gets its fourth consecutive victory. We're going to be breaking down a season sweep of the Arizona Cardinals coming up next year on our latest post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be teaming up here for our weekly post-game show with my co-host, Connor Benintendi, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you are in nearby Bellevue, Washington, or if you are down in Tucson, Arizona. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in. And luckily, Connor, we get to dive into a second victory over the Arizona Cardinals in a 3-week span. But at least for a couple minutes, it looked like this was going to be a much different game than the one that we saw at Lumen Field. There were more points in this game than what we saw a few weeks ago. But fortunately for the 12s, the Seahawks rebounded from that rough start, giving up a quick touchdown drive. They were down 7-0. After that point, the defense got back to creating turnovers. The offense, believe it or not, led by the offensive line, had a balanced approach, over 170 rushing yards in this game. It felt like, to an extent, that this is kind of one of those games where a lot of the things that were really still hurting this team, we started to see them really put together things on offense. The special teams was good. It was just a really strong all-around football game by Mike Macdonald's squad.
It was, and we saw the biggest improvements, Corbin, obviously in the offensive line, which we're going to get to, but just a huge performance. It's the most rushing yards this team has had since week 1 of this season. I mean, are you kidding me? Like that, it sounds crazy to say, but it was like back in those days, it sounds like almost, Corbin. We weren't worried so much about the run game, and then obviously things settled in, and it's been one of the biggest concerns about this Seahawks team as the season has gone on. Zach Charbonnet, just incredible today. You see the team numbers there on the screen, 259 passing yards for Arizona, 233 for Seattle, but obviously the rushing yards were the biggest difference for the Seahawks in this game. And Zach Charbonnet, we've talked about it in recent weeks on this podcast, Corbin, that Zach Charbonnet might be, or at least this is my opinion, is that Zach Charbonnet might be the better fit for this offense, and he showed it today, and that was partially because of the offensive line, of course, but Zach Charbonnet, just his downhill running style, the way that he's able to punish defenders, the way that he's able to just continue to combine that speed in addition to the punishing running style is what makes him so dangerous. And that 51-yard rushing score, Corbin, was the longest run of the season by quite a big margin. The longest run of the season so far for the Seahawks prior to that run was just 28 yards by Kenneth Walker, and that was all the way back in week 3. It's incredible the turnaround that we saw today, and that was it was a team effort, truly, between the offensive line and Zach Charbonnet as a whole. And so it was great to see. It really was, and I think you saw the defense also step up. Obviously, they snapped their streak of 2 straight pick sixes, but you had also the 2 interceptions. So it was great to see the team effort today, and I think we're starting to see what this Seahawks team is capable of doing, especially if they're able to play into mid-January.
Yeah, and I think that we can safely say there's still a lot of room for improvement. The second half, the offense was not able to get a lot going after racing out to a big lead in the first half. But I want to talk about that flurry at the end of the first quarter, because that's really what won this game. The Cardinals come out and they get a 41-yard touchdown from Kyler Murray to Michael Wilson, who beat Kobe Bryant on a corner route. And he comes wide open. Murray, that might have been the best throw I've seen him make in a game against the Seahawks. It was beautifully dropped in there. And like I said, it felt like at that point, oh, this has a chance it could be a lot different if the Cardinals are going to be making plays like that. But really, after that point, aside from some garbage yardage in the second half, the Cardinals were not able to get anything going once again on offense. The run game, the statistics at the end are going to show they had a good game running the ball. But again, a lot of that was garbage statistics late in the game when Seattle was playing for the pass. This team still was well under 100 yards for most of the game. the Arizona Cardinals were on the ground. So it was still another really good performance from the run defense. But those interceptions is really what got the avalanche rolling, so to speak. Weird to say that in Arizona, but got this game going in Seattle's favor and all the momentum going to the other sideline. Ernest Jones, he was talking about it after the game. It was one of those situations where second drive for the Cardinals, Seahawks had just kicked a field goal to make it 7-3. He turns and suddenly, the ball's gift wrapped right there to him. He was shocked. He couldn't believe that Kyler Murray threw that football because he threw it right at him. Clearly, Murray did not see him. That ball gets returned inside the 20-yard line. Very next play, Jack Smith-Njigba gets a dime dropped from Geno Smith, 19-yard touchdown. Now it's 10-7 Seahawks. A couple plays later, Kobe Bryant redeems himself for that earlier touchdown, undercuts and out route to Zay Jones, picks it off. A few plays later, Zach Charbonnet is going into the end zone on a fly sweep, and suddenly it's a 10-point game. That was really what changed the tide in this football game. And Seattle obviously added that 51-yard touchdown run from Zach Charbonnet towards the end of the first half as well to give themselves a 14-point advantage going into the second half. Really, it's weird because we remember all those years where Pete Carroll had the, can you win in the first quarter? Can you win in the second quarter? Can you win in the third quarter? Seattle won this game in the first quarter. There's no question about it with what they did on defense and the way that the offense played. And look, we can talk Zach Charbonnet. We can talk Geno Smith. We're going to have plenty of time to talk about the skill guys. To me, this game was about the offensive line. They deserved all the roses they got at the end of the game. Geno Smith got hit twice this entire game. It was the first time all year that he wasn't sacked a single time. Some of that was his ability to get the ball out quickly, but the offensive line was playing fantastic football. The touchdown to Jack Smith-Njigba, he was on his second progression there. And how many times this year has he not even been able to get to his second progression because of the pressure that he has been under? Zach Charbonnet, all those huge holes, that 51-yard touchdown that he had on that counter tray, you got to see Satoa Lamea get out there in space and how athletic this guy really is. Abe Lucas as well with that kick-out block. The offensive line as a whole, it was easily the best that this group has played, and you're starting to see some continuity with this current group, and that's what's exciting with 5 games left to play.
Yeah, I agree. And it's another thing that Mike McDonald talked about after the game as well, Corbin, just saying that, it's nice to have this same group of guys for 2 weeks in a row. And it's like, how often has Seattle had that? I know that they've obviously, had a couple games with the same group of guys, but it has come down to the fact that you went down to at right tackle, right? Like you started with George Fant, you went to Stone Forsythe, and then you went to
Mike Jarrell.
Mike Jarrell, thank you. Exactly. I mean, we've had so many at this point, I'm almost starting to forget. It's incredible the evolution that this offensive line has been through. And then all of a sudden you plug in Abraham Lucas again. You've had some continuity with him there. Christian Haynes has obviously had his opportunities, but it just didn't work out in terms of the starting lineup. And now you plug Satoa Lamea in there, and he's had those reps a couple weeks in a row here. And you're starting to see Satoa Lamea is looking confident, Corbin. And that's, I think, one of the best things about what this group is doing at this point. You can see that when he gets open in space with Abraham Lucas, again, on that counter that you're talking about on the 51-yard touchdown run, you see Lamea, he just gets in there, he lays the pancake, he lays on top of him, he eliminates a defensive player. Boom. That's exactly what you want him to do. You have Charles Cross and you have Olu Oluwatimi sealing off the right side of the defensive line. You have Charles Cross getting to the second and even the third level on that play to continue to open up holes for Zach Charbonnet. And Charbonnet just has to do the rest. He breaks 2 tackles and he's gone. It was beautiful to see because this is what we saw so many times during Pete Carroll's tenure, very, very long 14-year tenure with the Seahawks, where the run game was so dominant, and it was difficult through the early part of this season to just continue to watch it fail time and time again, because it really, really came down to the fact that this offensive line did not look like it was gelling. And I don't think that was anybody's fault in particular, but now we're starting to see them kind of catch a stride. And it's curious because when you come back to the running back side of things, Corbin, what has kind of struck me throughout this season is that you look at Ken Walker, and I obviously think the world of Ken Walker and the talent that he has and everything that he has in terms of an athletic ability. But Ken Walker is one of those running backs that is somewhat indecisive, right? Like he's always looking for the big play. And I don't think that that's necessarily a result of the offensive line, but Zach Charbonnet seems like he just hits that one hole and he goes. And I think that's something we haven't seen from Ken Walker this year. And I'm interested to see how it works out whenever Ken can get back and if the offensive line continues to get this much push, because if they continue to play the way that they are and Ken Walker is still not churning out yards the way that Zach was today, you have to have a serious look at the running back position and try to decide who's better for this offense when you have Charbonnet playing the way he did today. But that's just my opinion.
We're now looking at his last two starts, Connor. He had 91 rushing yards against the Miami Dolphins back in week 3, 130-plus yards on the ground. And, oh, by the way, he had 7 catches for 59 yards today out of the backfield, too. So I do wonder if you start to have some discussions internally about what you're going to do at that backfield position, because he does have that more downhill, decisive. He's patient. There were a couple of times we saw that today with him letting his blocks get set up. So it's interesting because I asked Geno Smith about this. Do you feel like this team is now finding their identity? He was saying it's more about, hey, today this team, with opponent we were playing, the gap scheme worked against it. But it feels like that is what this football team is. They are better at running the football with those gap schemes where they can get downhill. You can get guys out in space pulling. It doesn't seem like this is a zone-centric team, and they are having most of their success these last couple of weeks with duos, with counters, with power. That seems to be the bread and butter for this team, and that identity is starting to develop. And as a run game connoisseur, that is getting me really excited. I'm hoping it's going to last more than one game, and we'll find out against a good Green Bay Packers team next week whether that is the case. But we will get to Green Bay here in a couple days. Let's focus on this victory. When we come back, we've got game balls to hand out here from State Farm Stadium. Who wins them on offense, defense, and special teams? Don't go away. You're listening to our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can bet on everything from DK Metcalf scoring a touchdown on Sunday Night Football against the Packers, or Ken Walker III returning and rushing for a touchdown on Sunday Night Football. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, on our post-game show by my co-host, Connor Benintendi, and a special thanks to all the 12s. Thanks, as always, for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. This was truly a de facto NFC West title game in many senses today. The Seahawks badly needing to win this game. The Cardinals, on the other side, they were desperate after losing 2 consecutive games. The Seahawks get the job done, pulling off the season sweep, a 30-18 victory over the Cardinals at State Farm Stadium. A lot of players that were standouts in all 3 phases. I thought the Seahawks had maybe their best game on special teams this year. And coming off last week, that is an incredibly encouraging development. But let's get to our game balls, shall we? And Connor, we'll talk about the real star of the show here in a second. But listen, Geno Smith, you'll look at the stat line. Didn't have the most passing yards in the game this year. Didn't even get to 250 passing yards, but he had an 80% completion rate, threw a really nice touchdown to Jack Smith and Jigba, wasn't sacked, and maybe the best thing, no turnovers, no interceptions for a second straight week. This is a really big development for the Seahawks because of the issues they've had turning the ball over, particularly Geno Smith this year, to see that they are starting to get in a groove where they are playing cleaner football in that regard.
Yeah, I think at one point, Corbin, Geno was like 17 for 18. I need to go and look at the exact numbers, but there was just a couple times in this game where you're looking at his stat line, and it's hard not to sort of be in awe at what Geno was doing. I think what I love the most about his performance, Corbin, is just that he didn't put the ball in harm's way. There was a couple plays where you kind of want back, almost like there was that deep route by Noah Fant where he overthrew him, and it's easy to just say, okay, that's a bad ball by Geno, but you also had 2 Arizona defenders in the area where if he throws that any shorter, it's going to be a contested ball that could potentially be a turnover. And I think what we're seeing from Geno Smith throughout this season as it goes on is that you're continuing to see him get a little bit better incrementally as the season keeps going of getting the ball out of harm's way, putting it only in positions where it's going to be only for the Seahawks player to avoid, obviously, interceptions or whatever it might be, fumbles in the backfield. The offensive line, of course, helps with that whenever you can keep Geno Smith clean. That's a huge help because you don't have to put him at risk of a fumble. But you're also seeing those throws where he's only putting it in a position where Seahawks players can get to it. And I think just continuously, you hear Mike McDonald talk about it, Corbin, but over and over again, he's also just continuing to make those third down throws that are so crucial for this team. And a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL cannot make those throws. The stat line comes out to 24 for 30, 233 yards and a touchdown, no sacks, which is just exactly what you want to see from your quarterback, whether they're the offensive line's fault or they're the quarterback's fault. It was almost a perfect performance, in my opinion, Corbin, from Geno Smith. And I think he did exactly what he had to do to get out of State Farm Stadium with a win.
Yeah, really the only throw that I can nitpick on, he had a chance to get the ball to Pharaoh Brown on that first drive and just threw it a little too far outside for him, but that was still a tough throw. You had some guys that were bearing it down on him. One of the few times he was under pressure today, the offensive line kept him clean. The offensive line also did a phenomenal job opening up run lanes for Zach Charbonnet, who, as we talked about in the last segment, clearly he was the star of the show today with a career high in rushing yards, over 130 rushing yards. He had 7 catches for 59 yards, 20 of those coming on a screen play. I cannot wait to look at the all 22 and start to break down how many yards he got after contact, because the line did a great job creating seams, but you also saw Zach Charbonnet creating a lot of that yardage when he was put into those ideal one-on-one situations where I just have to beat this one defender that's not blocked, and he did a really good job of that. Made a couple really nice catches. There was one that Geno kind of overthrew a little bit, and he reached up and plucked it like he was an all-pro tight end. It was a fantastic catch. This guy is continuing to get better, and he had a little bit of a slump in the middle of the season where he wasn't playing a lot, and when he was, it seemed like he wasn't playing with much confidence. You can't say that now with the way that he ran in limited action last week, that game-winning touchdown in New Jersey, and then this week, 2 more touchdowns. This guy is becoming a touchdown machine when he plays in games. He's had 4 touchdowns in his last 2 starts that he's had for the Seahawks. So if Ken Walker III isn't going to be available next week, Seattle should have confidence because this kid's got confidence with the way he's playing, catching the football and running the football.
Yeah, it's been miraculous to see because I hesitate to say it, but Seattle is going to have a tough situation at the end of next year or during next year about what they do at the running back position because they have 2 incredibly good running backs, and it's going to be. We know what the running back market looks like, Corbin, because it's not nice to these running backs. And when you have 2 very, very talented backs, what do you do in that situation, especially if Zach Charbonnet is going to continue to play this good? And let's say in a situation where Ken Walker's out next week and Zach Charbonnet emulates what he did today, you're starting to wonder about what your running back room looks like going forward. So it is a huge question, and it's going to be something that we're watching closely really over the next year even at this point. But on the defensive side of the football, I've got to highlight Kobe Bryant again, Corbin, because Kobe Bryant just – at this point, we can't say enough about what he has done in terms of a comeback from really not having a place on this roster between being a nickel corner to – primarily a nickel corner, to then transitioning obviously to safety and becoming a primary safety and now becoming the starting safety for the Seahawks after Rayshon Jenkins went on IR and him continuing to step up. 2nd interception in 3 weeks, obviously both of Kyler Murray since they played the Cardinals twice in 3 weeks. The numbers don't look stellar there. Obviously 4 tackles, the interception, the forced fumble. But still, he's a turnover machine, Corbin, and we talked about this even before the season, I think, where he's an opportunistic player, and he really capitalizes on every single chance he can to turn the game in Seattle's favor, and we continue to see that at this point. The read that he made on that interception was incredible. Mike McDonald talked about it post-game, saying it was actually a busted coverage that Kobe Bryant was able to capitalize on and undercut that deep crosser and able to get the interception. So there's just not enough we can say about the way Kobe Bryant's playing. I still think he's one of the most sure tacklers on this defense as well. So when you're creating turnovers and you're also one of the most sure tacklers on the entire defense, how do you not give this man a game ball?
I'm going to go to the linebacking group, and it would be easy to say, well, this is going to be Ernest Jones. And he played well today. He had the interception. But what can you say about what Tyrese Knight is doing right now? The rookie out of UTEP leading the team with 12 tackles. He had several that were near the line of scrimmage. But maybe what I was most excited about today, there was one play late in the game where he got twisted into a pretzel in coverage. But you take out that play against Michael Wilson. Look, a linebacker on a big-bodied receiver, those kind of things are going to happen. But he had 2 pass breakups, one of them going over the middle where he looked like a safety making the play on the football. He is getting at least one pressure every game as a blitzer, it feels like. I just love the complete game that we are seeing right now from this rookie. He is playing with a ton of confidence. He is doing a great job reading run concepts and getting downhill, shedding blocks, making plays on the football in coverage. And when he gets a chance to blitz occasionally, he's finding a way to get home and at least generate some pressure. I just feel like Tyrese Knight right now, he's playing as well as any rookie on this roster. He is playing excellent football, and that move to put him in the lineup and jettison Tyrell Dodson continues to pay dividends, him alongside Ernest Jones. I thought he quietly had a really good game. Didn't have the flashy stats, but he did lead the team in tackles, had a lot of stops near the line of scrimmage, the pass breakups. He had one of his more complete games since coming into the starting lineup. Real quick on special teams, as I mentioned, unlike last week where we were like, man, who we give the game ball to because everybody was messing up, this was a different story. It felt like the special teams was a big advantage for Seattle in this game. Arizona had some miscues. They had the missed field goal in the second half. Their punter got hurt, ironically. Seattle was the one coming into this game with the punter that had health concerns. Michael Dixon didn't look like his back was bothering him at all, though, and the magician went to work late with a punt that all of us thought were going to – in the press box, we're like, that one's going to go back beyond the end zone. Hits the 1-yard line, and it just bounces straight sideways and goes out of bounds at the 2. It was a phenomenal – it was one of those sorcerer punts that we see him unroll sometimes. I thought Michael Dixon, considering the circumstances, he was as good as we've seen him in a long time today.
Yeah, I agree. And then, of course, you have the offensive side or the offsides penalty that kind of negates a little bit of that penalty, which is that placement, which is unfortunate. But at the end of the day, yeah, Michael Dixon, after wondering whether he was even going to play in this game, I think every Seattle fan was stoked that he was able to because he was excellent today. And then on the other side of it, I know we highlight Jason Myers almost every week at this point because he really just has been that good. Today he goes 3 for 3 with a long of 36, and he hits all 3 of the extra points. You just got to love it because at that point, if you subtract those 9 points, this is a much different game. Jason Myers just continuing to be consistent whenever Seattle needs him. Did we lose Corbin? We may have lost Corbin. Let me make sure it's not me. It is not me. I love it. We have some technical difficulties. Yep. All right. I have shifted into Corbin's position. So we're going to go into the 3 up, 3 down, my friends. Starting with the 3 up, it's going to start with JSN. JSN, we talk about him almost every single week at this point, but JSN just, I think really when you're getting to this point in the season, we're starting to see JSN's rise into a wide receiver 1. And we've talked about this almost 2 weeks in a row at this point, that maybe even 3 weeks in a row at this point, that JSN is rising into a wide receiver 1 role. And he truly is. We look at you look at the comparison between DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Obviously, JSN has surpassed DK in terms of yardage and everything else like that at this point. But we're just starting to see the reliance on JSN continue to go throughout these last couple weeks, rather than it being DK Metcalf, which is obviously supposed to be the previous wide receiver one for the Seahawks at this point. Jackson Smith-Njigba finishes with 5 receptions for 82 yards and a touchdown. He obviously has that huge touchdown right after the Ernest Jones interception early in the game, continuing to just be an absolute X factor for this offense. There we go. He's back. We're talking.
Hey, listen, I'm in a stadium, and apparently the Wi-Fi up here died because I'm having to use a hotspot.
That's all right. We're just talking Jackson Smith-Njigba on 3 up, 3 down. So if you want to talk any Jackson Smith-Njigba, my friend, go for it.
Yeah, what can you say about JSN? He continues to play at an incredibly high level. The shoestring catch that he had was one of the best catches that I have ever seen. That is one that normally you're going to see receivers try to dive for, but as he was telling us after the game, he was confident he had a chance to catch that and be able to turn upfield and do something with it. He didn't want to dive and take himself out of the play. And I agree with Geno Smith. If Geno would have been able to get that ball to him in stride, he might have been gone for a touchdown because he had nobody in front of him. Unfortunately, Smith did get hit when he threw that ball, and that's what led that ball to tailspin down and almost be an incompletion. But this kid just week in and week out, he is the number one target right now for the Seattle Seahawks. Geno Smith looks for him in clutch situations, his ability to create after the catch. I think JSN is playing really good football. We talked about Zach Charbonnet in the game he had, but I want to give a shout out to Kenny McIntosh out of the backfield because I know this, our 12s, the fans that listen to this show, we read your comments, and we know that a number of you have been wanting to see what Kenny McIntosh can do, and he has had very limited opportunities. And I thought going into this game was going to be like week 2 and week 3, that Charbonnet was going to get almost all the carries. You wouldn't see much Kenny McIntosh in this game. McIntosh goes out and has almost 50 yards rushing and averages 5.6 yards per carry in this game at a 16-yard run. The Seahawks are starting to get some confidence in this kid, Connor, and it's exciting to see because he missed almost his entire rookie season after he had a really good start to training camp, and he's just had all these different setbacks, but he's a talented back that did a lot of good things at Georgia for that run game-oriented offense at the college level against SEC competition, and you're seeing that carry over now to the NFL, and it was exciting to see him come in there and give them some really good sparks with the backup running back position, complementing Zach Charbonnet in this game.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on Derek Hall just for a second, just because obviously you talked about drawing the 3 holding calls. Everything that Derek Hall has done this season has been miraculous, and he's really, especially early in the season, Corbin, was probably Seattle's best pass rusher, both in terms of creating pressures and also converting those into sacks. But on the Kenny McIntosh side, it also just clouds this running back conversation even more, because you can almost see where if Ken Walker didn't exist, how good this running back room could be with just Zach Charbonnet, Kenny McIntosh, and then whoever else slots in a year from now or 2 years from now, whatever else it is. And I am a huge proponent for paying running backs because I do think that they are more valuable than what most people pin on them. However, you just have these games where it's so confusing because you obviously you have so many defensive players that Seattle's going to have to pay in the coming years, and it clouds things because how are you going to give Kenneth Walker III a massive contract when you have to pay Ernest Jones potentially this year? At this point, you have Reek Wollen's contracts coming up, you have Devin Witherspoon's contracts coming up, so on and so forth. It makes it really, really difficult. And I think that there's going to be a situation where they're going to have to sit down and decide what's the best version of our running back room. Does it include Kenneth Walker III, or does it include Ken Walker III, Zach Charbonnet, and Kenny McIntosh, right? Because we've seen such a good production from just these 2 players, and it's only one game. So I do want to highlight that it's only one game. But it does just spark that little bit of intrigue in my head looking forward. We still have a good bit of this season to go, but it's just a very curious situation. And I thought Kenny McIntosh was excellent today. He looked almost as good as Zach Charbonnet in his limited opportunities. He had that 16-yard run that was honestly electric And you just love to see it from a guy who has had very limited chances in the NFL so far, at least in the regular season.
Switching gears now to our 3 down. When you have these wins, especially one that was a pretty commanding one, again, there's not a lot of players they can highlight that said that you say, well, that guy had a bad game. But there certainly were some veterans that didn't have big games or stand out. And I want to start off with Tyler Lockett because Geno Smith threw an absolute dime to Tyler Lockett, and I believe that was in the third quarter. It was 3rd and a mile, and I thought they were just going to run the football and try to kick a field goal. They ended up getting a field goal anyway, but Geno Smith took that shot downfield, and we've seen Lockett over the years so many times make those catches along the sideline, the Willie Mays catch. He makes those look so routine, and he couldn't hold on to the ball through the ground. He didn't have a catch today. It was the first time in a game since 2019 that he played and did not have a catch. And so you got the contributions from Smith and Jigba. Metcalf made some big catches in this game as it went on, but Lockett gets shut out with no receptions. So for that reason, we have to have him on this list, even if he didn't necessarily have a bad drop. That was a really difficult catch to make, but the fact he didn't have any catches, that tells you right now where he's at in this offense. He's struggling to get those opportunities with the emergence of Jackson, Smith, and Jigba.
Yeah, and it's not only that, but I think we're on game 4 now, Corbin, where he hasn't gone over 20 yards receiving. And it is starting to feel like Tyler Lockett is a bit of an afterthought in this offense. And it doesn't feel good to say because we all, not all of us, but at least a couple of us, and I think you and I talked about it a couple times, Corbin, where we discussed this, that Tyler Lockett was going to continue to be sort of phased out of this offense. He was definitely going to be the wide receiver 3 in this offense, especially with JSN's emergence, and we're really starting to see that, especially since DK Metcalf's injury that kind of forced JSN into a wide receiver 1 role, and then he's maintained that even since DK returned. It's unfortunate because we all love Tyler Lockett. We love seeing Tyler Lockett do Tyler Lockett things, right? And that throw to the corner of the end zone was very vintage Tyler Lockett-esque. And unfortunately, he was not able to come down with the catch. So it was kind of just a situation where you're looking at it like, yeah, you know what? Tyler Lockett is not the receiver he once was, and we can accept that considering he's in year 10. On the flip side of things, Julian Love, we've talked about him a million times on this show as being one of the better defenders on this defense, and he still is. You just didn't feel him as much in this game, and I think that's the main thing that I'll highlight. You didn't feel him as much. There's always 2 or 3 or 4 highlight plays that Julian Love is making, whether it's a tackle for loss or whether it's something near the line of scrimmage where he's coming up and making those plays. You just didn't see him as much in this game, and that wasn't really a result of a bad defensive performance. It was more so the fact you just had so many guys who were flying around the football and making great plays that I think Julian Love just really didn't have to do as much in this game. But obviously, he's still the communicator in the back end. He's constantly talking. He's making plays happen for other guys. So I think it was still a positive performance from him, but you just didn't see as much in this one.
Yeah, and he missed several tackles in the first half. That was the most notable thing to me. He just wasn't his usual effective self getting ball carriers to the ground. It was certainly not his best game. And Draymond Jones up front, he did get a pressure. He drew a penalty in this game, but it was another game where you look at the stat line, and it just didn't feel like Draymond Jones was making much of an impact for a good chunk of this game. He had 1 tackle in the entire game. And I do think the fact that Uchenna Nwosu was back and was eating into some of those snaps, that played a role in some of it. But the Cardinals were able to run successfully off the edge a bit in the second quarter, and they were attacking his side. And they were attacking him, forcing him to try to contain, and he lost contain a couple of times. And that made things lighten up a little bit in the inside. They were able to start getting some of the between the tackles stuff, loosen up the interior. So I just felt like, not that it was a terrible performance, but they're just, again, for a guy that's making the money Draymond Jones is making, you're expecting there to be more meat on the bone. And right now there just isn't. You're not getting the production from him consistently. There's been some better games as of late. Today, though, was a really quiet one for him. And it did feel like, from a run defense standpoint, that he took a little bit of a step back.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you have to criticize him when it's there, because he's supposed to be one of the leaders of this defense. and he's going to have down games. I don't think that there's too much room to just say, look, you had one off game, let's step it up a little bit and really, really harp on him for that. I think that would be misplaced, and I don't think we're necessarily doing that. It's just one of those things where you have to look at it and say, at the end of the day, Julian Love has to be a guy who's showing up every single game. And I think we're going to see that probably the rest of the season. We see the defense talk about the playoff mindset, and they're doing that. And we're seeing it on a week in and week out basis. I think the biggest thing is you're just going to see different guys show up. And look, at the end of the day, I thought, as you know, Corbin, I thought Devin Witherspoon was going to get a pick six this week. Two other guys got interceptions. So, there's going to be situations where you don't know who's going to step up on this defense. But that's one of the things that makes it great at this point in the year, is that you have so many guys who are contributing. And unfortunately, you're going to have down weeks for some players. You're going to have highlights for some players. And that's okay, because there's going to be situations where the guys who are contributing across the entire defensive line, the middle of the defense, and the back end are going to continue to create turnovers, create sacks, whatever it might be. And that's one of the reasons that I think this team is trending towards a playoff berth at this point.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Connor at C. John Benintendi. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, it is a Victory Monday version of Monday Musings. I'll be teaming back up with Rob Rang, and we'll take a deeper dive into Seattle's fourth consecutive win and their season sweep over the Arizona Cardinals. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.